Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today's Wednesday, May 18, 2022. For those of you that might be new to the live broadcast, this is an opportunity to ask questions, submit topics. I can speak to any topic. Specifically, we want to make this available for family and friends. So if you have questions that they might have or that they've asked you, feel free to ask those questions to me. If you want to share this link with them ahead of time, it's always welcome for our Evoke families to share that with their family and friends, and then they can join and ask questions of me. If you are a family or a friend of an Evoke client and you're asking a question or you're asking for it on behalf of one of those folks, please let me know your age. That helps me to be sure that I'm answering the question at an age appropriate level. So with that, I'm going to get right into it. In fact, before we get into our first question, I wanted to start off with a quote that I read this week. One of my, if any of you are on Instagram and even Twitter, I think on Facebook also, I really love this account. If you like really complex psychology, really metaphorical psychology, depth psychology, Jungian psychology, I think this is a fantastic account. It's one of the ones that I look to. In fact, I feel like I've shared with her that at times I feel like I'm reading a book because I'm getting the best of the best quotes. The name of it is, for those listening, is at Sophia Cycles. And I took this quote specifically from Instagram, but I think it's also on Twitter and Facebook. And here's how the quote reads. It's a quote from James Hollis from his book, The Broken Mirror. And it reads, Jung himself noted this frequent disappointment to the ego. Quote, I have treated many patients who were conscious of the cause of their complexes down to the last detail without having been helped in any way by this insight. And the reason I brought this quote today is because I want to talk for just a moment about the nature of psychotherapy, what it serves. Psychotherapy can serve you in a lot of ways. It can be problem solving. It can help you manage crises, of course. It can help you develop skills. It can provide you with insight. But there's more to it than just the information that you receive. It's the experience. In fact, I shared this at a conference I spoke at last week professionally. If the therapist doesn't understand that psychotherapy is experiential in nature, no matter what the venue, even if you're walking into an office with LED lighting, you're still talking about the experience of walking into a session, telling somebody about yourself, and the risk is that what might happen to you in the past will happen to you again, which is you'll be judged, you'll be told that something about you is wrong or broken. They'll try to fix you, which will again communicate that message. But part of psychotherapy is, or a big piece of psychotherapy in the way that we look at it at Evoke, it's the experience that you have of being seen. One of the things I talk to people about all the time is therapy is the 1 hour a week where I can't get it wrong as a client, that is. My hour from 11 a.m. to noon on Fridays is the one place where I don't have to get it right. I don't have to take care of anybody else. I can say whatever I need. And because I have a capable, empathic therapist, she can hear me and find me and she can reflect that back. And what Jung was complaining about or criticizing was it's not always about insight. The person has to re-experience themselves. The healing that happens in psychotherapy isn't about the acquisition of knowledge, although that happens. In fact, my son said today, we were talking about this very quote today, and he said if therapy was about psychology, just the dispensing of psychology, the study of human behavior, nobody in this family, the Reedy family, would be going to therapy. Because I hope by this point, have enough adequate information, but it's the experience of going back to the same place again and again and experiencing yourself as okay. And when you can carry that around inside, we call that an attachment repair if it didn't happen in childhood. If it happened in childhood, we call it a secure attachment. You carry around inside of you the therapist, that sense, that feeling that they give you that you're okay. Think about infants and secure attachment. When the infant is securely attached to the parent or the toddler, they use the parent as kind of a base of operations, right? They go and explore the room or the park or the world that they're in, and they reference back to the parents, and they know that they're safe. As we progress beyond the toddler stage and and really literally go out into the world, we carry around a copy of that parent in our unconscious. That sense that we are okay. And I'm super excited about this idea because, again, although the live participants are attending this broadcast because most likely their child is in a therapeutic program with us, or maybe they've attended an intensive, but really I'm speaking to the heart of what it means to be a human, what it means to be a person. I wrote this week about how the adage, the idea that gets attributed to Maya Angelou, if I knew better, I would do better. She said something more like, I didn't know better back then, and now that I know better, I do better. But she gets credited with this idea that if I knew what to do, I would do it. Everybody watching and listening to the sound of my voice knows, if they're honest with themselves, that that's not the way the world works. Yes, sometimes new skills and insight help us. But really, the quote would be, in my opinion, if I felt better, I would do better. If I felt better about myself, if I was full up, if my belly was full, speaking metaphorically, of course, spiritually and emotionally. In fact, having this discussion just the other night, my wife said something at the dinner table. I posted it on my Instagram because she didn't want to be on my Instagram, but it was really her quote. She said, we must be careful not to show up into our relationships hungry, or we're liable to eat the other person. And I think so much of us show up to our parenting and our partnerships expecting the other person to make us happy. And one of the things that I've learned in my own work is that my wife is not responsible for my happiness. It's my responsibility. My happiness is my responsibility. And conversely, I'm not responsible for making her happy. That's her responsibility. And maybe more fundamental than that, especially because a lot of our audience are parents, your children are not responsible for your happiness. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Our children are not responsible to make us happy. That is our job. And as I've been thinking about this idea, and I've shared it before, I realized that until one accepts that they are primarily responsible for their own happiness, they're going to end up resentful, complaining, trying to manipulate the world to show up for them in the way that they need, instead of what we try to teach, which is you communicate assertively what your needs are. You ask for them as assertively and clearly as you can. And if you find out a relationship doesn't offer that, you find a way to get it met somewhere else, with a therapist, with a support group, with a trusted friend, right? And ultimately, if it becomes toxic and chronic enough, that might lead to the end of the relationship. In parenting, of course, it's a lot trickier because our children are really, really horrible. Many of them, especially those struggling with mental illness, mental health issues, and addiction, are really the worst at taking care of us. And if they try to, the cost of taking care of your parents, of believing that their serenity, their happiness is your responsibility. I have to stop using drugs so my mother and father can sleep at night. I have to stop cutting on myself, or stop refusing to go to school, or stop being anxious or depressed so my parents can rest easily, can be happy. If that gets loaded onto the child's shoulders and the child accepts it as a worthy charge, as a worthy project, the loss is profound. The loss is part of them. In psychological terms, what they've lost is their authentic self, or their real self. So yes, therapy. I mean, ironic, isn't it, that somebody who's doing a psychoeducational podcast on a regular basis is saying that insight and information and tools and skills is not the complete answer. But it's important to know that therapy is a place that you go to hear yourself reflected back, to hear the parts of yourself that have been lost or obscured by the impulse to meet other people's needs, to rediscover those, to reconnect to those. That's why our intensive program is called Finding You. because it's finding the you that was lost a long time ago, that was sacrificed or given up to take care of others, most likely parents or caregivers. So I wanted to share that at the outset. Let's talk about a couple of other things you guys are curious about this evening. The first question that comes in says, what would your boundaries be for a 15-year-old, 14 or 15-year-old regarding drug use in the home? Is it different for him or her versus a 21-year-old? I'm gonna nitpick this just for the purpose of educating. When you ask your therapist, what would you do? What would your boundaries be? It's kind of an interesting question, because the fact of the matter is, on my good days, my boundaries are going to be clear and insightful and courageous and honest and authentic. And on my weak moments, on my weak days, my boundaries are going to be diffused. They're going to be missing. They're going to be manipulative. They're going to be coercive to other people, threatening or intimidating, manipulating. So the question really isn't what would the therapist do, because we're a human work in progress. One of the things I've been teaching lately, remember this, mental health is not about getting better in a sense. Mental health is about understanding how compromised you are, making peace with the flaws, the issues that you have. In that project and that path, one doesn't need defenses. And that's what symptoms are. Mental health symptoms are defenses against threats. And the threat is that we're not good or worthy of love or belonging. So mental health is more about making peace with your faults and your flaws than it is about improving them. But by the way, when we make peace with our flaws and our faults, they improve. The great master therapist Carl Rogers said it this way. He said, the great paradox is that it's only when I accept myself fully that I can change. So that's a bit of an aside to the question, but it's not really about what I would or wouldn't do. But let me tell you the thinking that goes into this type of question. Yes, it's a different question for a 14 or a 15-year-old than it is a 21-year-old. Let's just start off with brain development. The earlier that substances are introduced and used at any regular interval, the earlier that they're introduced to a human brain, the more likely the development of addictive patterns of addiction. So brain development is critical when we talk about introducing human beings to substances. See, the adolescent brain that goes somewhere around 11 years old to 25 years old. That's what neurologists refer to as the adolescent brain. The adolescent brain is evolving and pruning itself and shaping itself dramatically. So it's a very formative time. One of the things we know about the adolescent brain is that it requires more stimulation for the release of dopamine, that feeling of pleasure and well-being and happiness and excitement. And so if you introduce chemicals into the body that release dopamine, like in adolescence, then you're wiring the brain for addiction. The person will have to do more and more and more often. They'll have to take substances to get that sense of even a baseline. So yes, I definitely think about adolescence very different than I do young adulthood. And while children are in my house under the age of 18 and 21, underneath that adult age, I'm going to have a very different boundary around substance use. And it's scientific and practical. I have a 14-year-old and I have a 29-year-old and two in between. And I have a very different perspective about their use of substances. And my 14-year-old, I said, look, it's not about me taking a position that you'll never have a drink, or maybe even that you'll never, use marijuana. That's not my position in life to make. That'll be your decision to make throughout the course of your life. But the battle I am going to fight during adolescence is I'm not going to make it easy for you. I'm going to do everything I can to prevent usage of substances. So yeah, I'm going to set some boundaries. Now, if you're in college and I have a 20-year-old that's home from college, or you're 20, my 20-year-old is not drawn towards substance use at all. But if he was, I would have a different feeling about that. I personally wouldn't break the law and provide him with alcohol or substances that were illegal. That would just be my own boundary for me, not trying to manage him, but that's my boundary to take care of me. But if he was 21 or 22 or 23, I'm just going to have as little opinion as possible about his substance use. And what I'm going to look for is how he shows up in the house, if he's kind. And if I have anything to do with supporting him financially, if he's passing his classes in college, or if we've made an agreement that I'll support him for a certain period of time, it's about how he shows up in the world. He's got to figure out his relationship with substances. I remember years ago I was in San Antonio, Texas, at a National Association of Treatment Professionals, and that group focuses primarily on substance use. And one of the questions asked to a panel was, if a parent asked you, how could you convince, I think the question was something like, how could you convince your young adult child that they have an addiction? And I remember listening to the answers, and like any good presentation, the question itself was something that I mulled over in my brain. And so I thought about it for a while, and I thought, it's not my job to convince my young adult or anybody in my life that they're an addict. Frankly, it's not even I don't even see it as my job with somebody under the age of 18. I can solve a boundary without determining whether it's an addiction or not. That's one point that I can stand firmly on. But the idea is that you give people the experience where they can figure it out. When young adults have said to me in our program, defensively, reflexively, like, I'm not an addict, I'm not an alcoholic, my response is, never said your word, wasn't even thinking about it. You have to figure that out. What I want to do is I want to do therapy with you, so that you have the insight, the tools, the wherewithal to know and be honest with yourself about your relationship with alcohol and drugs. Oh, and by the way, when I do therapy that way versus imposing my paradigm, my opinion onto somebody else, guess what happens to that young adult? They want to keep talking to me. I've had former clients that were adolescents and young adult clients reach out to me years later, a decade later, when they felt like they were in a stuck place in their life where they were struggling with substance use disorder or serious addiction. And what I attribute this reaching back out to me is that I didn't try to control them and their ideas. In Al-Anon or in Alcoholics Anonymous, what I'm teaching you is a given. Whether or not your child or your spouse or your mother or your father or your sister or your brother or your neighbor is a quote unquote alcoholic or drug addict is none of your business. Now, the reason why most folks want to know if people qualify for that label is then they think that label empowers them to set healthy boundaries. You can set any boundary you want to. And like I talk about as a primary thesis in the book, The Audacity to Be You, this work that we do at Evoke, what we teach parents and families, you don't get to be right anymore or good, but you do get to be a self. And it is so much better to be a self versus being right or good. So, long-winded answer to say, yes, I think of them differently. I think of 14-year-old and 15-year-olds very differently as I do 21-year-olds. Even though there's some argument that the brain is probably still developing until 22 to 25, somewhere around that range. But it's developed enough that I'm not as concerned about it. And so I have different boundaries because of that. And what I love about it with my 14-year-old is she's even shared this information that I just shared with you with her teacher, which he was very skeptical of. But the idea is it's just a practical decision for me. So that's a long-winded answer. Next question. Somebody asked the question, what is the primary difference between wilderness and conventional therapy, and why does wilderness work faster? It's a great question. Wilderness works faster because it's immersive. And the immersive nature of it means that it's as if we've turned the volume up on the lessons. We've turned it up quite a bit. See, the use of metaphor and symbolism, which wilderness therapy does quite well, right? Making a bow drill fire, getting to camp and working together in small groups to get the campsite ready, cleaning it up the next day before you go on a hike, hiking from one place to another. All of these rituals, these activities become grist for the mill. And the benefit of using metaphorical therapy is that it bypasses resistance. If I walk into a session with a 15-year-old or 16-year-old and I start talking about drugs and alcohol and depression and anxiety and twisted thinking, the walls are going to go up, right? I'm just their mother and father trying to control them. But when we're talking about a bow drill fire, it is what it is. When it's raining or snowing at night, I don't have to give you a lecture about preparation. You don't have to teach a farmer the law of the harvest. Does that make sense? Because it's intrinsic in their lifestyle. In fact, one of the theories that I draw from to talk about wilderness therapy is that the more advanced we become, the more technology, the more life-saving tools that enter our life, the more we get disconnected from nature. And we are nature. I love that quote. Andy Goldsworthy, I think, is the name of the one who said it. When people talk about being disconnected from nature, they forget the idea that we are nature. And so when you're disconnected from nature, you're disconnected from yourself. So living in the dirt on the ground. Years ago, I was asked by the local Boy Scout troop to be the Boy Scout leader when it came to like winter camping. It's not my thing. They thought because I worked at the wilderness therapy program that I was hardcore, and maybe compared to some of them I was, but I'm not hardcore in terms of an outdoors person. So we go up to we have this first winter camping event. I bring one of my hardcore staff with me because I need help. I don't know what I'm doing. I do therapy, and we get up there, and the first thing I notice is as we're setting up camp is these Boy Scouts are far less cooperative than my wilderness kids. It is chaos. They're having snowball fights. They're not putting up their shelters. The sun's going down, and once the sun goes down in the canyons of Utah in the winter, it's going to get cold. And if you're wet because you've taken a few snowballs down your shirt, you're going to be in trouble. So we're managing them. We end up getting a fire together. We cook these pre-prepared meals in foil, but it's getting late. I'm stressed. I'm tired. It's been a long afternoon and evening kind of organizing things. And we eat half frozen and half burnt meals. We get all the kids to sleep. Everybody's warm and dry enough to survive the night. And I get in the shelter that I built with my employee that came with me. And exhausted, I said to him, I don't know how you guys do this every week. And not only do you guys do this every week, but you guys do this on your weeks off. His name is Sean, and Sean just says, it doesn't get any more real than this. And I realize he's right. It's real. It's not a contrived lesson. Games and exercises and workbooks, those are contrived, but dealing with nature and weather and things you can't control, it offers you all the lessons that life offers you. That small little wilderness group is a microcosm of the universe, of the broader world, right? So the immersion, the comprehensive nature of the lessons, the bypassing resistance. We're going to talk about getting your backpack, getting it suited so that you can carry it, and it'll be lighter if you do it well. We're going to do all of that to be able to get you ready for the hike for the day. And in that, it's like taking a person and teaching them about baseball. I remember I heard years ago, I heard a commercial. I can never find it again. It was on the radio, and it was the baseball player Derek Jeter. If you don't know who Derek Jeter is, he's wasn't my favorite, but he's one of the greatest baseball players of all time, and he played for the Yankees, and I guess that makes him even better for most people. But Derek Jeter's talking about growing up, and his father was his coach, and he said, "My whole childhood, I thought my father was teaching me about baseball, but I realized he was teaching me about life." So that's how wilderness is different. It goes beyond the talk back and forth, and it's experiential. It's in your body. It's in your relationships. It's in the day's activities and tasks and challenges. Frustration tolerance, delay of gratification, communication, problem solving, conflict resolution. All of that comes into play. So that's why after 3 or 4 days in the wilderness, even if the parent didn't fill out an application or write a letter describing why they sent their child to Evoke, the wilderness therapist can get on the phone with the parent, and often does, and says, "Let me tell you how your child is showing up in the group." And the parent will inevitably say, invariably, they will say, that's them. You got them. That's exactly what they are like at home. So that's what makes wilderness therapy different. All right, next question. Somebody says, "My daughter meets the criteria for autism spectrum disorder. Just a toe over the line. And has developmental trauma. She was adopted at age 2. Neuropsych testing reveals IQ scores in the range of the 80s to 110s. She may well have FSAD." I don't know what FSAD is. I should know that. Will you tell me what that is? Will you look that up and tell me? "She has difficulty in virtually every area academically and has great difficulty socially despite wonderful supportive help and care in her highly relational caring residential treatment center. The staff adore her, and she struggles dramatically with her peers because she is like a 10 or 11-year-old in a 15-year-old's body. Her psychiatrist said, 'I adore your daughter, and it is very hard being her.' What are the needs, concerns, and ways of supporting kids like mine, complex kids with intellectual and functional challenges who struggle even among the strugglers, and who may well need support well into adulthood, perhaps their entire life? Kids who are vulnerable, alcohol, being trafficked, violence, bullying, because they are so desperate for connection and just can't make it land with peers." Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is what FSAD is. Thank you. My heart goes out to her and to you. She sounds like a sweet, sweet human being, and it sounds like she's got some cards stacked against her. So I feel that. Like all of you, like all parents that are listening to this, you need support. You need support from experts. You need support from peers. You can't do this alone. See, at the end of the day, I don't have a solution. There's no generic solution. It's going to take extra resources, time, money, and blood, sweat, and tears by you to support her. That's true to some extent with all the parents of all the children that we serve. Yours is just more than most. Your child, like you said, struggles among the strugglers. So you have to get extra help. You have to get extra support. One of the things that I hear from families all the time, when we encourage, one of the things we encourage, and I always go over this slide at some point during the broadcast toward the end, that we encourage all current families to attend 6 12-step support groups for the family members of addicts, alcoholics, those struggling with addictive disorders, and other problems. But part of what we're saying is you have to go someplace where you cannot be alone. These are, in some ways, especially with your child, unsolvable problems to some extent. So I don't have a template of solutions. It's going to be highly specialized care, and it's going to require a lot of your energy. So you can't do this alone. You need help. You need community. And you need to feed yourself. When I encourage you all to go to therapy, it's not because you caused your child's problems. It's because you need extra support because you have a child that's struggling with mental health issues and addictive issues. And therefore, you need extra support and help. So what would I say to you? I would say to you the same thing I say to all of our families. If you walk into Al-Anon and everybody else is talking about an alcohol-abusing spouse, just translate that into a ASD or FASD child. Somebody who's incapable of healthy self-care and functioning, not functioning in the world at an adequate level. That's your job. And the core lessons. See, when people think that it's about alcohol or drugs, they miss the point of the meetings. It's not about alcohol or drugs. It's about somebody that you love, somebody that you're in a relationship to, who's struggling dramatically to function in a healthy and safe way, who's self-sabotaging. And, you know, I think Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous and Adult Children of Alcoholics is good for everybody, even if you have, I don't know if this is possible, but if you had nobody in your life that was struggling, nobody that you loved that was struggling, I still think it's about how to be a person and how to love other people. In the Journey of the Heroic Parent, I talked about how the most common question I get asked by families is, what do I do? Should I drug test my child? How much screen time is the right amount? There are all these questions about what should I do. As best I can tell you, that's not the question. The question is, the questions are, who are you? What's your relationship with your child like? And what's your relationship to their issues? When you answer those questions, what to do will come out of it. You know, a lot of people get very frustrated with me, including in my own field. But we have to change the question from what do we do to what's the nature, what does it mean to be a parent? What does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to be a spouse? And I submit to you that the answers to those various questions have much, much, much more in common than they do different. So you need support, you need help, you need community, you need to be with experts, and it's gonna tax you. And you're gonna have to sort through daily and weekly and monthly and yearly challenges that other people have to sort through. I can't be more specific than that because I don't know all the circumstances. And the more specific I get, the more people misinterpret the words that I use with the ideas. One of my good friends and colleagues who just passed away not too long ago, Sanford Sapiro. He's I think the only repeat guest that I had on the podcast, and he passed away a couple of months ago. But when he would teach our staff, he was a wonderful teacher, and he was a wonderful educator, specialized in treating or working with people with learning disabilities. And what Sanford would say is the letter of accountability, we call it the letter of awareness now, but he would say the letter of awareness or the letter of accountability isn't accountability. When I was teaching last week in Nashville at my conference, I was explaining the problem with psychological theories and models is that people misinterpret the words for the idea. So if I gave you words and tools and skills, if the equation changes by 10%, you'd be lost. That's why, if you're new to this, this is what people tell me. The more they listen to these podcasts, this weekly immersion into a different way of thinking, they start to, especially the questions and answers. When a question gets asked, they start to think, I wonder how I would answer that question. I wonder how Brad's going to answer that question. And by the way, it's not really Brad Reedy's answer. I've just synthesized what I've learned from Jamie Gill and from the masters in psychology and in psychotherapy and analysis. And you learn to think differently. That's really what this is about. It's learning to think differently. All right, next question. What's the next question, Sarah? Remember, drop them before I'm finished with the previous question, if you wouldn't mind. Shoot, I'm gonna have to go look for them in the back. Let's see. Somebody writes, this isn't the main thrust of your webinars, but I wondered if you had any thoughts for parents who are updating their wills and have a troubled teen. We obviously fear that an inheritance would be used impulsively or in a way that exacerbates their problems. There are trusts and other mechanics to safeguard assets. The issue for us is our child's well-being. Our extended family questions the tough parenting choices we've made on this journey. They've made it clear that they would handle things very differently. We have no other family to turn to. Any thoughts? Your question kind of reveals to me that you're on the right track. You know, here's the funny thing about your family. I'll reread this. It says, our extended family questions the tough parenting choices we've had to make on this journey. I had this thought when I was reading that sentence, and I was thinking, if they were in therapy, they would understand. But more to the point, if they were in therapy, they simply wouldn't judge you. They wouldn't even imagine to know your truth. I had a good friend many years ago who was going through a divorce. We were in our 30s, late 30s, I think, maybe 40s even. And I was talking to him, and he said, I talked to my mom, and she said I should. And I stopped him, and I said, Dave, stop right there. The advice your mother's going to give you is that you're going to tell me is going to be horrible. He said, what are you talking about? I haven't even told you what she said. And I said, the very fact that she knew what you should do is the problem. I know that sounds strange to somebody who's new to this work, but you don't know what somebody else should do. You just don't. It's hard enough in life figuring out your own truth, your own values, you know, finding your own voice, let alone being the beacon of truth for other people and telling them how they should live their life. I don't think that's our job. That's not what healthy attachment is. There's no science in child development that says a parent is supposed to tell a child how to live and what choices to make. There's no correlation from that idea. In fact, there's a negative correlation between the idea that a parent thinks that they should know what a child should do and a child's developmental health. There's a negative correlation between those two ideas. So the very fact that your family is judging you tells me that they're more compromised than they have any inkling of. And the fact of the matter is you're on the right track. You're going to tailor your will and your trust to match developmentally what you think is appropriate for your children to have. That's your boundary, and you get to set it. So absolutely, I would create a will and a trust with what you know about yourself, your children, and their issues in mind. And I've heard lots of people share with me examples where, you know, that things vested later in life, you know, 25 or 30, that gives a little bit more time for development. Or that you assign a trustee that you trust. Doesn't even have to be a family member. If it's a professional that you trust that can mete out the financial support if there's a significant amount that matches the needs of the child. Again, you take the risk that somebody might get a little bit intoxicated with that power, but that's where it comes into trusting. You could always just give all of it away to somebody else, to charity too. Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball player, said, if his children came to him asking for a handout, he'd say, go get a college degree first and come up with a solid business plan that makes me want to invest in your business, and then we'll talk. Otherwise, you get nothing from me. There's a great attorney here that somebody I know was talking about, and they did this whole values assessment before they came up with the will and trust. So I think and I think your thinking is the right thinking, which is you're making decisions that are informed by you, your values, your relationship to the children, and their specific needs. And you're going to do what you feel comfortable and good about. And it's your family's loss. Next question reads, my son experiences severe OCD on a daily basis. He has taken many steps to be able to function easier. My husband is visiting him this weekend for his birthday and some father-son time. If you had one piece of advice for my husband, what might that be? I'm going to read that again. My son experiences severe OCD on a daily basis. He has taken many steps to be able to function easier. My husband is visiting him this weekend for his birthday for some father-son time. If you had any piece of advice for my husband, what might that be? I suppose if you twisted my arm and I were forced to give advice which goes against my training, I would tell your husband to focus on his behavior and his reactions, not his son's. Focus on his anxiety, your husband's anxiety. Have your husband focus on his mental health and well-being. And to play the long game. See, parenting is the long game. I think we feel part of what causes such high stakes anxiety in our society is that we think each choice is going to make or break things. That very idea increases anxiety, and the increase of anxiety is the increase of threat, and the increase of threat blocks you from your more creative, spontaneous, insightful behaviors and reactions, your flexibility. So my advice would be, with all parents and with your husband, focus on your stuff. Be curious about your son's progress or struggle. Be curious about that. But make your project your mental health and your reactions. One of my favorite stories, and this is maybe the first time that it really hit me, but I could tell you 1,000 stories like this. I had a mother years ago. In fact, she was the one that suggested webinars before anybody was doing them back in the late 2000 aughts. And she had her son home from therapeutic boarding school to do some college tours, college visits. And she called me to give me an update. And she said to me, his responses, his maturity when looking at colleges was just about the same as it was before all the treatment. Some of it, at least. She said, but that's not why I'm calling you. I'm calling you because I responded differently. And I said, you've found the treasure. You found the gold. It's not about him. When parents start to tell me, look, here's what my child is doing, but here's how I'm responding to it. Here's what's coming up for me. Here's my impulse, my instinct. Here's what I did or didn't do. That's the only thing you have control over. It's the only thing. And that's really, 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 really hard. And it's the only thing you have control over. So the process is about focusing on your project and shifting the project from your child's mental health to your mental health. And that's what I would say to him. And just be curious about how the child is doing. Somebody writes, please describe the earth fire, water, and air phases. What are they? What is their purpose? And what do they signify for the student and their progress? Earth is about orientation. You enter the program, and that first phase is that you're separated from the group. And by being separated from the group, you have time to observe and to listen quietly to the voice or the voices in your head, to discover who you are, to write what got you to this point, to write your life story, to write some goals for yourself. So Earth is about orientation and initiation into the program. Fire then is the dynamic change, right? It's about learning and growing, about burning and finding your light, finding your passion, finding your source of energy and strength. Accountability is what we start to talk about during the fire phase. And I'm not talking about a police-like accountability. I'm talking about realizing that you're responsible, like I was saying at the beginning to you guys. You're responsible for your own happiness in life. It's just as much of a mistake to expect your parents to change as it is to expect your children to change. So fire phase is about getting started, finding energy, finding sources of strength, accountability, being able at least to begin to cooperate with the program, to kind of learn how the program works and operate. Water phase is not everybody gets to water phase. We specifically came up with phases that not everybody would get through because we don't think of wilderness therapy or any therapy for that matter as something where you can arrive. That's the mistake. That's the mental illness. The mental illness is not I'm struggling and I need help and support and I have these issues that vex me at times. That's mental health. Mental illness is I've got it handled. I don't have problems. My childhood was perfect. That's mental illness. That's what it sounds like. So water phase is about changing from external motivation to internal. You start to taste the sweetness of the work. You start to see its value. You know, when clients say to us, when students say to us, what's in it for me? I say to them, that's the best possible question you could ask me. Let's talk about what's in it for you. Let's talk about why cocaine is a short-term solution. Let's talk about why self-harm might help in the moment, but doesn't help for the rest of your life. Let's talk about why love and kindness feed you. And fear and rage cripple you. Let's talk about that. So water phase is when it starts to become internalized. There's a fluidity to it. There's a grace to it. Water fits into the container easily, right? It adapts. And then air phase is about future focus, more about leadership, and about kind of looking forward in your life, connecting your present and your past to where you want to go. And there are assignments therapeutically, academically, skill-wise in terms of living outside that are associated with each stage of the program, each phase of the program. And again, we use symbols and metaphors and images because those they don't confront resistance directly and head on. They go around it. You want to know the most common form of resistance? Or if it's not the most common in outpatient therapy, it's at least the most insidious. The most insidious, and I would argue the most common form of resistance in outpatient therapy is compliance. Have you ever heard the term spiritual bypass? It's kind of like that. It's the skipping of a developmental phase, which often includes some kind of suffering and discomfort. So when kids say, I want to do better, I'm like, slow down. Before you do better, let's first explore what's hurting. In the chapter on behaviorism, I wrote on the first, in the journey of the heroic parent, I forget what chapter this is, chapter 7 maybe, I'm not sure. But I wrote and I said maybe 5. I said, before we change a behavior in our child, before we set out on trying to change behavior in our children, we would be wise to first listen to what the behavior is trying to tell us. See, the behavior that shows up as problematic is trying to speak because we're not listening to it. Either we ourselves aren't listening to it inside of us, or we're not listening to it as parents. All right. The next question says, my wife and I have had the privilege of mentoring a few other families with a child at Evoke. Of course, we've been asked since we've also had a child in your program. Can you comment on why you established a mentor option and share what you value from mentors? I'm so glad you asked this. This was the same person that suggested the webinars all those years ago, 14 years ago, 15 years ago, that suggested the mentor program, because we wanted you to have somebody to talk to that wasn't a clinician, that was just the one thing that we can't, the one thing that we can do in this life is offer each other our presence. The great Guru Ram Dass said, we are all just walking each other home. I was reading this quote the other day. I want to read this to you because it'll take me just a second to find, but it's such a powerful quote. This is from the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who just recently passed away. Thich Nhat Hanh said, the secret of creating peace is that when you listen to another person, you have only one purpose to offer him: an opportunity to empty his heart. So it also came to me because I remember after my son had gone to Wilderness, I had a colleague call me and he said, Brad, I'm not calling you as a therapist or as the clinical director or even as the owner and co-founder of Evoke. I'm calling you as a parent. Can you talk about what it was like to send your child away? And it shifted me into the mentor role. I just shared my story. So it's about offering comfort and companionship in a lonely and scary place. And there are so many of life's problems. I have multiple sclerosis. I have MS, okay? I don't talk about it a lot, but in this context, it makes sense. As of today, May 18th, 2022, MS is incurable. When I was diagnosed with it back in, gosh, I forget how long it's been right now, but it was 2015 November, I want to say. I found out at the hospital. My wife and I had come to the hospital in separate cars, and so we left in separate cars. And I remember I was driving home, and I was overwhelmed with this new diagnosis, and I ended up calling a friend. He was a younger friend, somebody I'd met, a musician. In fact, the opening song that you listen to, he's the bass player, and his last name is Osmond. And yes, it is that Osmond. It's Alan Osmond's son. His name is Tyler. And Tyler Osmond's father, Alan, and his brother, David, are very popular spokespersons for MS and MS treatment. So I knew that Tyler had experience with people in his family who had MS. So at the time, he was probably in his late 20s. And I called Tyler and I said, Tyler, I just left the doctor. And I almost tear up when I say it now. And I said, I just found out that I have MS. I didn't know what I needed from him or why I was calling him. And this 27-year-old young adult said to me on the other line, he said, I love you, and you're not alone, and you'll never be alone. And I remember thinking, that's what I needed. We are so accustomed to believing that we can, and that it's a worthy effort to try to solve the problem of pain, the problem of living, really. But what I had to learn as a young therapist, and I have to learn over and over again as a father and a husband and a friend, I have to relearn it after I forget it, is that the real gift that we offer, like the monk said, is we offer a place for them to empty their hearts. So what do I want? What do we want from mentors? We just want you to be able to share your story and to let them know that they're not alone. You don't have to give answers or advice. In fact, we prefer that you don't give answers or advice. You can defer to others, but just tell them what it's been like for you and let them feel your presence as they walk this, what has been and what can be a very, very lonely journey toward healing. All right, one more. Somebody writes, son is 16 years old. Do you recommend that grandparents, siblings, and friends write general letters to him during his time in wilderness? If they haven't invested in the work along the way, would it be counterproductive for their progress? I will ultimately defer to the therapist that's working with your child, but I would ask that they get involved in some way in educating themselves about the program and about this before they write letters. I'm going to make a caveat to that. As a child progresses in wilderness therapy and moves through their own evolution and growth, we give them access to more and more folks who have less and less treatment savvy. So sometimes we even let them talk to the peers or the girlfriends, boyfriends at home that you might have even considered a negative influence, with your permission, of course, with your collaboration. We don't do this to them and to you. We talk about it as a team and it gets decided. But the idea is we want to see how they respond to that too. But early on, it's mom and dad, and then it moves to people who have some investment in educating themselves about the therapeutic process at Evoke. And then later on, it's, if it goes long enough, it could be anybody. Because real life is like that, isn't it? It's like if you got in a car accident and you get rushed to the emergency room, to the trauma center at the hospital, nobody's allowed in the room except for the treatment professionals. And then after there's a stabilization, then maybe one parent or a spouse can come in. And then when they're moved into the hospital room, then it's a few people at a time. And then eventually, of course, they're reintroduced to their life. So it's kind of like that. But instead of medical being the construct that limits the visitations, it's the psychology of things. Great questions tonight, you guys. Thank you for all of that. All right, a couple of announcements. My books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. I read the copy. I read the Audible book for Audacity to Be You. We have Charitable Partners if you're interested in giving back. You can go to choosementalhealth.org, sky'sthelimitfund.org, or evokefamilyfoundation.org. Those are all of the partners that we have that we contribute finances to and support to, and that contribute to the field and helping people get therapy that can't afford it. We have a support group every week for a wilderness family and alumni. The next one is tomorrow night, May 19th at 6:30 p.m. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. May 24th is that offering at 6:30, and then we have a monthly meeting for intensive alumni of our intensive program, June 14th at 6 p.m. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want to do a deep dive in your own work, I cannot overemphasize the value of these programs. Finding You, June 16th through 20th is the next offering, is a look into your past, your family of origin, your upbringing, your child development, and seeing how that's impacting all your relationships and circumstances. You don't have to have a child. You don't have to be a parent at Evoke. It's for anybody that wants a deeper understanding of what is going on in their life today. We also have an online offering. June 24th through 26th is an online offering. It's half the time and less than half the price. We have a young adult program that's coming up in June 10th through 13th. It's being facilitated by my daughter, who's a fantastic facilitator and does most of our trainings of our other therapists. June 10th through 13th, programming specific for young adults. Intensives at evoketherapy.com is the place to go for more information, or to our website. We have life coaches, parent coaches, couples coaches that are trained in attachment-based therapy. Just go to coaching@evoketherapy.com, email us there, or go to our website there. We have pursuits trips, Think Therapy Light, adventure, customized trips all over the world, anywhere from 3 days to 30 days. It can be any kind of adventure, mountain climbing, rafting, trail, deep country, backcountry hiking, fly fishing, mountain biking, anything you could imagine, Utah or the world. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or adult children. RefugeRecovery.org and NAMI.org is another couple of resources that have free classes and support in your local communities. All of these recordings are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just go there and search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com. You can find Evoke or myself, Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can also find our intensives social media on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, the Evoke Therapy blog on our website has new content each week by our talented and wonderful Evoke staff. My next meeting will be May 24th next week. The title is Let's Talk About Sex. We'll be talking about sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, child development as it relates to sex, the whole gamut. 6:30 p.m. May 24th. We'll be doing that. And then after that, will be another question and answer every other time. As I like to say, thank you for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And for and on behalf of the people that love you and that you love, thank you for joining and being willing to do your work and look at yourself in this process. Have a great week, folks, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.